Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Joe Hates Music. This week we are ranking the 14 studio albums from Depeche Mode. This was the winner of a poll that we put on the community tab. We were looking for a classic 80s band to cover, and Joe was praying that New Order didn't win. Came down to a tie between Depeche Mode and New Order. We did a little runoff poll. Depeche Mode ended up winning to Joe's delight, but I think it might have been a case of careful what you wish for.
You know, I was pretty negative in our little group text outside of the channel. But I kind of came around a little bit, so I don't hate it as much as I thought. I still probably think I hate New Order more. So, I don't know. The first time through, sometimes it's just like, especially a band like Depeche Mode, where it's just like the same thing a lot of the time. There's not a lot of variations. You know, after Peter Gabriel, where literally everything was different, like so much variety, to this, where they honed in their sound and they didn't change it too much throughout their history, so a little harder to take in increments of 14 whole albums.
They changed their sound drastically, but not frequently. But if you look at the first few records versus the last couple records, I think they sound very different. But I know what you're saying. There's a chunk of like 6 albums that are kind of interchangeable, and then 4 albums that are kind of the same, and then 4 albums that are kind of the same.
I was going to say, it seems like their change was basically from like a MIDI synthesizer to pure like computerized bleeps and bloops. For better or worse, we'll find out which I prefer.
Within the context of what they're operating with, they changed a little bit. I like Depeche Mode. I don't love them. I can love them from time to time. Like if the mood is right and, you know, the environment is correct, that can be awesome. I know Joe and me in our early 20s probably danced to some of their stuff at some 80s clubs back in Pittsburgh. And then like the other night I came home, it was like 50 degrees, kind of Halloween-y and spooky out, and I was a little tipsy and, lit a candle and put on, Black Celebration, and it ruled. But, maybe in the middle of summer at noon while it's hot, Depeche Mode's not going to hit the spot.
For me, I've talked about it on the channel before. I grew up more of a classic rock kind of guy, and then I got into like more contemporary indie rock type of stuff and kind of glazed over the 80s, but I actually ended up playing in an 80s cover band for a few years before I moved from Pittsburgh. And so when I was doing that, I got into a lot more of the 80s stuff, and I got Depeche Mode's greatest hits, and I enjoy it a good bit. I like their singles a lot. I don't necessarily think the LP is the greatest medium for them necessarily. I think they kind of work better, track by track, but I didn't hate it. I enjoyed going through them. But yeah, let's get into it, I guess. Who wants to start?
I'll start it off. We don't want to start with too much hate, so I didn't hate any of these, but there are a handful at the bottom that I don't particularly like that much. Again, don't hate, don't dislike. I think the problem with them sometimes is it just really leaves you hanging and doesn't really evoke that much. So my number 14 is going to be Delta Machine. This comes in the middle of 3 or 4 albums post 2000 that are almost interchangeable to me. Super kind of, like Joe was saying, bleeps and bloops without that kind of old school dance beat that they were doing in the 80s. They were trying probably a little bit more technique and a little bit more craft with their kind of blend of structure and atmosphere. But unfortunately for me, the end result is that it just plays a little bit dull. Again, pretty much everything from like Exciter on through the newest one, Spirit, are kind of similar to me. It'll come down to just kind of the amount of tracks that I like, and Delta Machine doesn't really have anything that jumps out at me. Angel's okay. Some of the guitar work on Slow is cool, but nothing to write home about. So 14, very last, is going to be Delta Machine for me.
I hear that. Also my last, I don't think I hated any of these albums. I kind of hated like having to listen to another one. Delta Machine came It came out in 2013. It's just, there's just nothing there that is new or exciting or that you haven't heard before. So I can't, remember a single one of these songs, and it's just sort of just blah, there's just nothing here. This is not a good starting point if you're getting into Depeche Mode, and not a great ending point either. It's just nothing exciting. It's not the worst thing in the world, but nothing stuck with me from this one.
Cram and I were texting last night about what my last place might be, and I didn't lie to you, but I changed my mind. My bottom is Construction Time again. Everything Counts is great, and Then is pretty good, but Pipeline and Shame are terrible, probably the two worst songs in their catalog, and everything else is really forgettable. And I don't know. I was leaning towards some other ones being at my bottom, but after going back through today and listening to skimming through everything again today, this one really just felt kind of weak.
I think it's probably the weakest one in that era for me, but I'm going to be talking about pretty much most of the new stuff here at the bottom of the barrel, but I can kind of tell maybe that really early stuff for you, Jason, might be just a little much too thin for your personal taste. My number 13 is going to be an album that I used to kind of like. I don't dislike it. It's one of 4 albums that I knew of the 14 going into this, and that is Exciter, which it is not very exciting to listen to. It starts off great with Dream On, which is an amazing track, and then nothing else really in the album really sounds like it, which is a real downer. It's pretty uninventive. It does have a nice warmer mix to it. I think of all the post-2000 ones, this one kind of sounds the best, but pretty much after Violator, with Songs of Devotion, they kind of started to really get towards that like Euro trance kind of vibe. By Ultra, they're pretty much in it, and they never really evolved out of that. They just kind of changed it up, changed the tempos a little bit, but never really broke through with anything new. And to me, this one just doesn't play to their strengths at all. It's a little bit stale and boring and dull. The whole thing's just like a big lull. It doesn't have that driving kind of club sensation that you like from early Depeche Mode. And unfortunately, The Dead of Night has some of the worst lyrics I've heard since we started this channel. Something about "we are the horny boys, we are the corny boys." And I don't think lyrics are their strong suit. I don't think the vocals are ever that strong suit. I don't think, amazing vocals. But at the right moments, they can be pretty good and add to the formula of the song. But this one kind of focuses on the wrong things. But because of the song Dream On, I do put it slightly ahead of Delta Machine. So number 13, Exciter.
Wow, Cramser, we are just on the same wavelength, because it is also my 13. I also think The Dead of Night, those lyrics in particular jumped out. I was like, yikes. Definitely what you said, this Euro kind of trance. I think it describes it perfectly. It's just boring as hell. Really, it started with Ultra. It was a bad kind of move for them as far as what I like about Depeche Mode. Is basically the opposite of Ultra, which was at least slightly catchier, a little more danceable than this one. This one's just boring, morose, nothing really, Dream On. I remember hearing it in the early 2000s and thinking, okay, that's okay. But that's by far the best track on this album. So it's a clunker for me. Exciter at number 13.
I wanted to say before I started my list that this is probably the least confident I've ever been that I've got these in the right order, or like the order that I like them in, because there's very little separating any of them. They're all pretty much interchangeable. So these could move around a lot if I listen to them more. My number 13 is Sounds of the Universe. I kind of feel the way about this that it sounded like Cram felt about Delta Machine. It's just kind of a late period record that it's fine. I don't really hate anything on it, but absolutely nothing jumped out at me. It felt like Depeche Mode by numbers. I couldn't even really tell you a standout track or anything like that, because it's really just, I don't know, kind of like wallpaper.
I could tell you a standout track, and so I will. It would be the first song, In Chains, which I like slightly more than Exciter and slightly more than Delta Machine, but again, all kind of in the same arena. So Sounds of the Universe is also my number 12, just kind of more of the same. And I'm talking about, we were talking about that trance sound, that really like Euro club vibe that they were going for, really with Ultra. but I think they do it really well on Ultra. But after that, they never expand upon it. They just recycle it over and over and over again. It sounds like when they were doing Ultra, it sounds like they could have written all 60 of these songs right then and just for each album cut the worst ones and the worst ones and the worst ones. It sounds like, they're trying to be Octung Baby, and it's just not nearly as good enough. But I didn't hate it. Little Soul is kind of cool, but In Chains I like a good bit, but nothing crazy. So number 12, Sounds of the Universe.
Yeah, that one's, I agree with you. It's not quite my 12th. I was hoping we'd go the whole way, just in sync. It would be really cool. But no, I have Ultra as my number 12. And it's that kind of annoying, dancey, like super Euro, late 90s sound that just I don't dig at all. This one was without Alan Wilder, and a kind of a big change in direction from Songs of Faith and Devotion, which I like a fair bit. This one was a pretty big sort of off a cliff for me. I really hate some of the instrumentals on here. Just nothing, again, nothing really stood out. Nothing excites me. So yeah, I have nothing to say about Ultra other than I just don't like it.
All right. Well, I disagree with that. My number 12 is Spirit. This is their most political album. They were talking about how they were, really upset with everything that was going on in the world at the time, and they wanted to put it into their music, which I don't know. I don't listen to lyrics a ton, especially when I'm like first listening to albums. So none of their other stuff really strikes me as political. So I think this is kind of like their first big like political record. I like the message. I think the vibe of the record is pretty cool, but it is severely lacking in memorable songs. Not real tuneful. I think Poison Heart's pretty cool. That would be the one song that kind of stuck out as a standout for me, but that's about it on that one.
I agree. I have Spirit at number 11. Like I said, lyrics are rarely their strong point. And this one isn't a great lyrical album, but at least it's communicating something and has a good message to it. And, there's a little bit more passion behind it. I do think some of the songwriting, just from the structure and just kind of the approach, is a decent bit tighter than the albums I was talking about before this. I do like Poison Heart. It's probably my favorite on that, or Going Backwards, which is the lead-off track. And I found that my favorite songs on a lot of the albums were the first song on the album. That's going to play greatly into my top 10 songs. So they're pretty good at leading off albums, but it's often just kind of, a good trailer for a lousy movie, unfortunately. So.
All right. Well, I got Sounds of the Universe at number 11, which y'all had at number 12. So we're kind of on the same track here. I agree with Kramser again. In Chains is pretty good. He's totally right about the first track on these albums, usually pretty strong. And that always got me like excited. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is the album where it finally turns around for him. And then they invariably let you down. But I mean, this isn't terrible. And I give this like a 6. It's fine. Sort of like maybe like Doves-ish a little bit. Doesn't quite sound like it was made on a computer as much as some of the ones before it. Other than that, nothing great, nothing terrible, just slightly better than the 3 I have behind it.
All right. Well, yeah, we're not exactly in step, but we're sort of in the same ballpark, except for our difference of opinion on Ultra. But I've got an Exciter at 11. It's more atmospheric than the records that came before it. Has a little more space in the mix. It's got those glitchy beats though that I do not like. Really of its time. I do love the track Free Love. I think that's a really good tune, but I hate I Feel Loved. Really, really terrible track. I don't know. I think it sounds like I like this record a little bit more than you guys. I don't mind it so much, but it's not great.
My number 10 is going to be Construction Time Again, which I kind of like, and I think it is kind of like a tighter unit than maybe Broken Frame and Speak and Spell. A little bit more of that industrial sound coming in. They kind of get away from some of like the charm and the playfulness of the first 2 albums. This one is also political in nature, but the lyrics don't really work for me. I'm going to beat a dead horse with this, but I don't think lyrics are really their strong suit. But that's probably just because of the nature of the music isn't really suited to have these really, in-depth lyrics. I think this album works more as a whole than with full tracks going on. But for something about the sound doesn't quite do it for me. I don't know if it's that industrial sound starting to come in, but it's not quite as like thin and as simple with the synth and keys as the first one, but they haven't really gotten that full rich sound that they'll get albums after this. So it's kind of in between, and that kind of bothers me a little bit. I do like Love in Itself. Again, the lead off track, pretty good. And I kind of like Told You So, but nothing really jumps out as a track. But I do like this considerably more than the ones I listed before that. So I'm going to talk about pretty much everything after this stuff that I like to recommend, you know, a good 3 out of 5 stars at least. So Construction Time, again, number 10, and somewhat enjoyable.
Very interesting that you both have Construction Time so low. I feel like that's going to be a point of contention at some point. For me, I have Spirit at number 10. You guys already described it. It's slightly more political than most of the other stuff. It kind of has a bigger sound, kind of more leaning towards Violator instead of, you know, Ultra, where it's more Euro. You know, it's fine. Again, there's just nothing jumping out at me about these songs. They all kind of, going backwards, whereas Revolution are fine, Scum's all right, and then it's just kind of like the same thing over and over. And by the time I'm done listening, I just don't really care that much anymore. So it's kind of a tough one to rank for me. I'll give it some bonus points for the political nature and the slightly improved lyrics. But again, it's still in the sort of do not recommend listening to, you know, section of my list.
All right. My number 10, I'm interested to see where you guys have this one. I've got Speak and Spell at number 10. It is probably their most upbeat record, maybe the only Depeche Mode record that you could describe as happy. Very tuneful, some catchy tunes. I really like some of the singles from it, but it's lacking in like mood and atmosphere. It's very kind of one-dimensional, and you know, it's a product of its time too. The technology isn't really there. The drum sounds are really bad, so it's got some things working against it, even though I kind of like the general feeling of it.
Well, I'll tell you where it comes in my list when I get to it. Not now. Number 9 for me is going to be my favorite of the 2000s, Playing the Angel. That said, it's got a couple strikes against it that the other ones don't. Number 1 being that I don't really like the lead-off track, a pain that I'm used to. I think it's really overblown and overdramatic. And I think this sounds the worst of any of the 14 albums. It's really messy and compressed, and the mix is pretty poor. It's mixed like they're like a heavier rock band. It just doesn't sound good to me. That said, this one of the 2000s albums finally does have like a good crop of songs on it with Suffer Well, Sinner and Me, and Precious. I all like a good bit. So at least they were hitting some good strides with the songwriting here. And nothing else is really terrible enough to complain about from a songwriting standpoint. So I think this is the cream of the crop in that timeline of those releases. But still, like, to me, everything after Ultra has like no evolution or innovation about it. It's just all kind of the same product recycled over and over, slightly different branding, and, you know, nothing really new. But, you know, the strength of those songs that I mentioned puts this at number 9 for me, Playing the Angel.
Also number 9 for me, also the best of the 2000s albums by a fairly large amount. You know, the compression, yeah, like it makes them sort of sound like not Depeche Mode, which is kind of why I like this more. It does sound more like a rock band instead of sort of, you know, what Depeche Mode is. And Suffer Well's pretty good song. I like John the Revelator, Suffer Well. The songs are just a little bit better. It's a little livelier, a little more drive, a little more energy, I think. And it's a pretty decent album. I'll give them that. I think from this point on, I like the albums. I don't hate them anymore. There you go. Good for Depeche Mode. They finally made a good album.
My number 9 is going to be Music for the Masses.
Whoa.
It's a really big sounding record. You can really hear like the technology improving and the budget kind of going up. But aside from the singles, I think this is like the biggest example of them like being a singles band. Strange Love is awesome. Never Let Me Down Again is awesome. Nothing else really is very good.
You missed a bunch of awesomes there. You only named 2 of the awesomes, but you were never really part of the masses, were you, buddy? That's okay. Yeah, my number 8 is going to be an album I liked a good bit, A Broken Frame. Jason describing Speak and Spell very well. I'll talk about that later. And this one kind of, already the album right after it, kind of breaks away from a lot of that happiness that you were talking about, and they start to become more of the Depeche Mode that they'll become in the late 80s and early 90s. Leave in Silence is good. See You is kind of sweet. It's almost like Beach Boys-esque with the backing vocals. Satellite isn't bad. It's probably 82nd on songs titled Satellite. I think every other band on earth has a song called Satellite. Photograph of You, kind of cool. Yeah, it's a little bit more thought out and a little bit more bold and ambitious, a little bit more musically creative than the debut, but I think the debut just has a real nice piece of like discovery and innocence about it that I'll talk about it later. But do you like a good batch of these songs? Broken Frame for me, number 8.
Yeah, well, I have my first one from the classic 80s era, Depeche Mode, so it'll be interesting to see how y'all react to this one. I have Some Great Reward as my number 8. And this is really kind of where they start doing a lot more like sampling, bringing in like the sound of a tea kettle falling down the stairs into sort of their mix. I don't love it. I prefer the sort of clunky Nintendo sounding synths from the stuff before this. And I think Gore's ballads on this, the ones he sings, are really bad. I think he, in general, does a good job writing this kind of slower, softer love songs, but for some reason on this one, they don't work at all. People Are People's okay. Master and Servant's kind of fun. S&M, it's cool. It's dark and moody, but just the songwriting just doesn't do it for me on this one. So I don't know. I have no idea how other people feel about Depeche Mode's discography and where they place these records. So I don't know if people are going to be outraged over this choice, but it just doesn't work for me.
I'm kind of with you on that. I don't have it quite yet, but it's coming pretty soon for me. My number 8 is one that you both had a lot lower. I've got Delta Machine at number 8. I don't know. I don't mind this record, really. The title tells you it's kind of got this bluesy feel to it. It's a lot darker than the records right before it. I think there's some really, really cool and interesting synth sounds on this record. I like the tracks Heaven, The Child Inside, and Soothe My Soul. I think are all pretty decent standouts. So yeah, I don't know. For a late period record, I think this is pretty strong.
To comment on what Joe was talking about, I did go through after I made my list and look at some of what the classic kind of ranking of these are. And it seems to me that there's a lot of appreciation for the later 2000s albums by like people that are really into Depeche Mode. And if you're more of a casual fan, probably like the 3 of us are, especially judging by our list so far, I just don't think they impress that much. But like if you go through the tribulations and the journeys of Depeche Mode, you can probably find things in the late 2000s that you're like, okay, I really appreciate this, respect that. But I'm not a diehard fan, so it just is what it is. My number 7 is going to be the debut Speak and Spell. New Life is great. Sometimes I Wish I Was Dead is cool. No Disco's cool. Just Can't Get Enough is really great. This album's just really peppy and youthful and fun and charming and, you know, cutesy kind of and simple and, you know, good call. Like it's got like just those simple, just like I press one thing on the keyboard and it makes one fake noise and it's fun to just do that. And it's just, you know, they're not really doing anything that like Kraftwerk didn't really invent, but, you know, they're definitely putting their own spin on it. It's got like this boyish nature to it. I really like the whole thing as a feel. I do think that maybe the songwriting is a little bit better on Broken Frame, but I think this whole thing just, you know, especially because it's bookended with Just Can't Get Enough and New Life, my 2 favorite songs on it. Everything's pretty much quick and short to the point, and even the songs that go over 4 minutes don't seem that long, and it's just a really easy listen for me, and I liked it a good bit. So number 7, Speak and Spell.
All right, well, if you were outraged over my placement of Some Great Reward, I got another one for you. My number 7 is Violator. Kind of how Jason feels about music for the masses, I feel about this one. It's literally Policy of Truth, Enjoy the Silence, and Personal Jesus, and nothing else. Those 3 songs are great, don't get me wrong. and they elevate the album. But nothing else really worked. I don't love the sound of this, like what they arrived at for the Violator sound. They worked with the producer Flood. So it's got like that, he did Act on Baby and some other stuff around the same time. And it has that like real kind of cold feel moving towards that whole dance kind of thing. And I don't know, there's something about it other than the singles I just do not like. I don't like the sound. And this is sort of the end of the 80s-ness of it, which I kind of dug. I like that part of Depeche Mode more than I thought I would. And the 90s just doesn't do it for me. So Violator number 7. It's fine. It's a good album thanks to those singles. But other than that, just sort of...
Probably going to be up there for highly contested by our commenters. If we do that end of the year poll about what we're glaringly wrong about, that might be up there as well.
I have a feeling nobody's really going to care about Depeche Mode, so I don't know.
They won the poll. People care.
People have spoken. You're a man of the people when you want to be. You're clever about that.
All right, my number 7. This is where I have Some Great Reward. The drums, percussion, and bass on this are extremely aggressive compared to the records leading up to it. It just like pummels you. It's kind of got a little bit of an industrial feel. Like Joe was talking about, they bring in sort of different sounds for this one. Generally, that's not my cup of tea, but I think it kind of works on this record. It's pretty decent. I think this is their best sounding record to this point in their career. This is kind of like, a pretty big step up from number 8. I think from here on up is where I would like recommend them.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Really good sounding record. I've got it at number 6, Some Great Reward. It just builds off of Broken Frame and then, Construction. And then, this one, just everything gets a little bit better for me. I like Lie to Me. I like People Are People. I don't really like Master and Servant, but I think it's really important in their kind of timeline. They start to get more of that kind of, sexual desire kind of, feel to their stuff. And I do think there's not a lot to complain about. I think this is kind of setting up the stream of albums that I really like that are pretty much going to be my number 5 on up, or, kind of building off of this. It's kind of, on deck, setting it up and everything. So I really appreciate this album, and I think it's a good listen. And, it's funny that we did this as an 80s poll, but as I look at my list, kind of a 90s band for me. So as far as my favorite albums go, so interesting. Number 6, Some Great Reward.
Well, fortunately, I'm bringing the 80s love because after this next one, there's no 90s, there's no 2000s, there's no 2010s left. I got Songs of Faith and Devotion at number 6. And I like this one. It feels really huge, just like anthemic, like We Want to Be You Too kind of. It's catchy, it's still depressing, but it's not quite as dark and sinister as Violator was. And I think, I Feel You, really good opener. I like Condemnation, has a cool kind of gospel sound to it. So it's pretty much all of these are good. I didn't hate any of these songs. So it was a good one. It's my favorite of their later years. And just a good sound, a little different, I think, and that helped as far as making it more memorable. So good album, Songs of Faith and Devotion. This is 93, so yeah, number 6 for me.
I'm right there with you. My number 6 is also Songs of Faith and Devotion. They made a conscious effort on Violator to kind of be a little looser in the studio, not quite as many programmed elements, and they take that even a step further on this record. It's a looser feel all through the record. A lot more of that blues and gospel influence come to the forefront. A lot of the songs are really great. Condemnation's awesome. Judas, One Caress, I love. So yeah, it's a really good record.
My number 5 is an album I like a good bit that I didn't anticipate liking, and that's Ultra. It's got a really nice kind of dark, aggressive, but smooth feel to it right off the bat with Barrel of a Gun. And even though I think this sets up the albums that I think all kind of interchangeable, this one definitely from song to song has a tremendous amount of variety to me, where I think everything else just kind of blends together. I think all of these tracks kind of take you on a different ride. And man, reading about the stuff they were going through when putting together this record is just like, you want to call your mom or your dad afterward and just be like, hey, just want you to know I'm all right. Pretty ugly stuff. But Barrel of a Gun is really good. Home and It's No Good are both awesome. Useless is really good. A lot of these songs just missed my top 10, but I think as a full album, it works really well. It's got like a nice, like, it's somehow sleek and rugged at the same time. And like I said, it's aggressive, but not always with the tempo and with the noise. But, you know, this maybe one or two on their lyrical albums. There's a lot of passion behind it and a lot of meaning. So I think, you know, they did this sound really well here and then never really did it that well again, or even tried to do anything else after this. But this one, you know, has more of like an alternative rock music feel to it than the ones after this. And I dig it. It's a pretty nice record. Ultra, number 5.
Okay. My number 5 is going to be the debut, Speak and Spell. Nothing like any of the others because, of course, most of the songs were written by Vince Clarke, who went on to be in Yazoo and was the founding member of Erasure. So if you know what Erasure sounds like, you kind of know why this is a much more upbeat album. He wrote pretty much all the songs on it. You know, it's that clunky sort of super early 80s synth sound. You know, most people just can't get enough, and that's kind of all over the album. It sounds like, you know, it was made by an Atari or a Nintendo or something like that, which I kind of dig. I didn't think I would as much as I did, and I think Clarke's presence definitely helps because it is poppier. It's interesting to listen to this one first because it's completely a different direction from here on out. And if you listen to this one like in the middle of listening to Depeche Mode, you would have no idea where any of this came from. So I liked it. I think it's fun, kitschy. I like Erasure a fair amount, so kind of makes sense why I would like this one. So there you go. Speak and Spell, my number 5.
My number 5 is another record that you both had a lot lower. I've got Playing the Angel. I think this is by far the best of their later work. I think it's a really nice bounce back from Exciter. I can kind of see what Cram's talking about when he's talking about the sound of it. It is probably overcompressed, but I also see what he's saying about when he says it's the best batch of songs of their later years. Suffer Well is awesome. Precious is really, really good. I also like John the Revelator a lot. And the rest of the album is solid too. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I like to kind of guess where you guys are going to be at. Joe's really thrown me through a loop. I thought you would like that album a good bit. My number 4 is going to be an album that I like a good bit, and if it weren't for a couple of things that I have problematically with it, it'd probably be number 3 or number 2, and that's Songs of Faith and Devotion. I really like that they didn't just make a follow-up to Violator. They really had like a conscious effort to try to do something a little different. You hear it right off the bat with kind of like a more rock and guitar forward song with I Feel You. One thing that I have against it is, even though the whole album has like that gospel nature to it, Condemnation is just way too much of it. It's over the top. It's one of my least favorite songs that they've done. In a group of 10 songs that I like a good bit, I think Judas is really pretty. In Your Room is awesome. So this is probably their brightest record to me since the debut, although, you know, you can't really compare the two. It's apples and oranges, but it's not quite as dark as the other stuff. You know, it has a little bit more glimmer and hope to it. But kind of what I was talking about of it not being Violator, it's also kind of what I have a problem with it. It feels like they're in their head a little bit, and there's a little bit too much of a conscious effort to try to do something different, which I know is something I'll complain about on later records, but this one doesn't seem to be quite as natural as some of their other stuff. That said, I did really like it. I've got it number 4. But for those little nitpicks, it kind of stops it from being number 3 or maybe even number 2, but I did like it quite a bit. So number 4, Songs of Faith and Devotion.
Hey, my number 4, I got Music for the Masses. Definitely a move towards like that Violator sound. Still a little bit, you know, not quite as slick, but, you know, it's got this cool, like, lush darkness to it. Sacred and Little 15, you know, they're still very sinister. There's a lot of, like, kind of creepy sort of, I don't know, you know, the lyrics, Martin Gore is sort of, he's an interesting lyricist, I'll say that. It's not like most of the other bands that we've listened to yet, but I think the songwriting on here is good. Never Let Me Down Again is really good. Strange Love, pretty much the whole first 6 songs are pretty great as far as, you know, structure and everything. no real complaints. Maybe tails off towards the end. Pimp, or however you say it, sort of a throwaway track. But I think it's a pretty good record. Interesting move. I guess this is where they do start to kind of differentiate from the first 4 or 5 albums. So it's a good album.
My number 4 is A Broken Frame. After not loving Speak and Spell, I was surprised by how much I like this one. Great melodies all through this record. I think that's really the strong point of the record. Very tuneful. But unlike Speak and Spell, there's more sort of atmosphere, mood, depth. The beats are cool. And just a lot of tracks that I really like. See You, The Meaning of Love, A Photograph of You, The Sun and the Rainfall are all really some of my favorite Depeche Mode songs now. So yeah, I think this one's really strong.
My number 3 is going to be Music for the Masses. Pretty much agree with everything Joe said, and I think the first half is better than the second half. First half's really good. If the second half lived up to the first half, this would easily be a number 2 for me. Never Let Me Down, again, Strange Love. They do kind of, during this time, have this tendency on cue at the exact same moment of every album, slow it down and kind of do a ballad. And it never really works for me until Violator. So like around songs 4 and 5, it kind of dulls up. But for me, up until this point, this has like their best blend of style and substance and theme. And I think it is kind of like a poppy record, but it's not pretty and it's not hook heavy. So it's got that kind of cool balance to it, and then, Behind the Wheel has just like that classic like thud beat to it that's really enjoyable. And it comes perfectly like an archangel in the album to kind of save it from almost getting a little bit too thick like gravy, and it just brings you back up. So I think this album is really good. Joe was talking about how, some of the themes are kind of like, it's almost got like this just like obsessive, like sexual impulse nature to it where, you've got the huffing and puffing and I Want You now. It's like just so obvious, but it kind of works for me. And, by then they have their audience and they know, and it plays to their strengths. I was talking about how something like Exciter doesn't play to their strengths. This one and the rest of these albums do perfectly. So I think this is a really good album. Music for the Masses, number 3.
All right, for my number 3, I have A Broken Frame, which was the first one after What's-His-Face left for Erasure. Vince Clarke left he left for Yazoo, but so this is the first one with all the tracks written by Martin Gore, and it's in a weird sort of like before they got industrial, after they sort of were a pop band, so it's sort of like this dark, morose synth pop, which I like. It's sort of like Duran Duran, but like flipped, sort of like evil Duran Duran. Like everything's sort of like gloomy and kind of dark, which is cool. It's very kind of unique as far as their catalog. The songs I think could be a little bit better, but I really like the sound of it. So it's a cool album. I think this was definitely sort of surprised me because I listened to them in order. I wasn't expecting sort of this sound from them ever, so I liked it. It's a cool album. Broken Frame, number 3.
Okay, my number 3 is Violator, as Joe mentioned, co-produced by Flood, and I was reading a little about it. They did a lot less pre-production on this. They went into the studio with less fully formed ideas, and I think you can really hear that in the record. It's got a much looser feel. Still sounds like Depeche Mode, but it has more of a traditional rock feel to it as well, which I think is really cool. And I think the songwriting is really, really strong. Unlike Joe, I think the non-hits are good as well. But of course, Enjoy the Silence and Policy of Truth are great. I like Blue Dress a lot. I think that track is really cool. So really good record.
All right, on to number 2, which is going to be Violator. No one's picking Violator as number 1. I like this album a lot. It's one of my favorite albums of 1990. Love it. I got no problems with it whatsoever. I think it's got this really awesome mix of their kind of dark, ominous sound and kind of that dance vibe. This is the album where I think that kind of middle spot where they kind of get it somber with like Halo and Waiting for the Night works. I like every song on here a lot, except Sweetest Perfection isn't my favorite, but I love World in My Eyes, Enjoy the Silence, Policy of Truth. I like Blue Dress. clean. There's also a lot of really cool stuff on the extended version of this album that's all instrumental stuff, but also really awesome. But even disregarding that, this is a really tight, awesome album, which I was 100% positive it would be my number one. It's a contender for Album of the Year in 1990. But one of my biggest surprises ever as a listographer will be my number one pick, which I'd never heard before, and it blew me away, and I like it more than Violator right now. But for now, number two is Violator.
I know what you're going to pick. I have no idea. I haven't been keeping track of what you haven't.
I think we might be heading towards a trifecta.
Like an underdog trifecta could be. We'll see.
Unfortunately, no, Jason, we are not. It looks like I might be the only one without it. And I believe this is probably a first in the history of listography where one person's last is another person's favorite. My number two is Black Celebration, which makes my number one Jason's number 14, which I don't know if that'll ever happen again. That's kind of bizarre. Black Celebration, very good album. They're most consistent, I think. Some really cool, dark, just really kind of mean, nasty songs on here. Fly on the Windscreen, the title track, A Question of Lust, Question of Time, which I hate when bands have similar sound. Like, it always bugs me. A Question of Lust, A Question of Time. It's probably the worst thing about this whole album. But I really like Martin Gore's vocals on here. Very, he's got that kind of quivering, super 80s style. But I think his songs on here, A Question of Lust in particular, really work well. A Question of Time has this kind of dark, brooding beat. It's almost like the Cars, but again, like flipped, the upside down version of the Cars. It's like pop songs, but like evil pop songs. It's a really cool album. Really, it's called Black Celebration, so it kind of tells you exactly what it's going to be in the title. And it's just a really good album. I was a little surprised. The first time I listened to all of these, I kind of was like, just get me to Violator. And then second time through, I kind of spent a lot more time listening to these 80s albums. And this one definitely grew on me a lot. So I think this and my number one are really the only one, maybe Broken Frame too, where I'm really kind of like surprised at how much I like it. And they keep growing on me and I keep kind of humming them, in my head. So not quite as dark and depressing as I thought this listen was going to be in my text messages to the rest of the listographers. So they got me. They got me on a couple of these.
That's good. My number two is Ultra. This is when Alan Wilder leaves the band. It sounds really of its time. It's got a real late 90s production sound to it. It sort of sounds like some of the bands that they influenced. It's kind of got like a little bit of like a Stabbing Westward feel to it or something. I don't know. Kind of like light industrial. But even though I normally don't like that sort of thing, it's just got really good songs, maybe their best batch of songwriting. Home is fantastic. It's No Good is awesome. I like The Bottom Line a lot. It's just, I don't know. It's rare for me that a record can overcome production that I don't like with songs that are that good. So just a top-notch batch of tunes on this one.
Yeah, that does shock me a bit. What did you say, like kind of glitchy kindness to it, which we've talked about a lot. But yeah, I agree. Ultra really good. And then my number one, Black Celebration. Joe talked about it beautifully or darkly. This is just, the album feel on this whole thing is just incredible. It blew me away. I had to go back to 1986 and see if it would actually fit into my top five, and it wouldn't quite get there. But, this is drastically overlooked, at least deserves a shout out for one of the best albums of 86. And my favorite Depeche Mode album, it's so dark and ominous and cryptic and gothic, and right on Fly on the Windscreen, the first line is death is everywhere, and it's just like, it's awesome. It's really dour and seedy. All the songs with Question in the title are good. Sometimes is my low point on it, but I still like it. Again, it's that kind of more slow ballady, slow it down for no reason really, but this one is one of the better versions. It's the only small complaint I have. I love how ghostly it is. Stripped is awesome. It's just tremendous. It's got such a cool vibe, and Joe really said it great. And a great note worth mentioning is not my favorite vocals and lyrics all the time, but everything kind of comes together for me on this, and it just works. I'm really what if you watched the Traffic video and Jason falling in love with the hell was the album?
When the Eagle Flies?
Yeah, this is me and Black Celebration right now. I will listen to it probably for another week or so, especially because, we're in Halloween mode right now, so it's really working for me. But I really like this album a lot, and it just eclipsed Violator. I didn't like Violator any less. I mean, I knew Violator the most going into it, and I still really like Violator, but this one brings up Depeche Mode as a whole for me because it's just one more really great album. And I think those two I could say are great albums. Everything else is pretty good, probably from like my number 6 on up, and then a little bit of good and then a little bit of lousy, but nothing bad. So number 1, Black Celebration.
Well, I might be the only person in the world whose favorite Depeche Mode album is Construction Time Again, but I really like Construction Time Again. I can't get the synth line from Love in itself out of my mind. Like it's just lodged in there. I've been just subconsciously humming it to myself all day. I think Everything Counts is great. I think The Landscape is Changing is great. I think the synth lines on this, I don't know if it's just that those are so catchy and have lodged in my brain, but I don't know. It's weird. It's starting to bring in that sort of industrial sound, which Martin Gore kind of explicitly states, if you read about the album. So, but it's still kind of in that intersection between like synth pop, industrial, the catchiness, the darkness, the sampling, the real sort of live, instrument sounding. So I guess that's probably why I like it the most. Sort of like a blurry kind of muddled mess of all their styles, but I just think it works all really well. And I did not expect Jason to have it last. So that's interesting. I don't know what that says about me or my Depeche Mode fandom, but if anyone else likes it the best, I'd love to hear why in the comments, because I have a feeling I'll be the only person, but this is the number 1.
I think you are the only one. From the list I was looking at online, it showed up as the very last on at least half the ones I looked at, and never got higher than like 10 or 11. So good for you, though. I mean, you like what you like.
Number 1, Black Celebration. I don't have a whole ton to add. You both said a lot, but I think this is a good example of a record where the mix does so much for it, because the record before it just beats you over the head with those really aggressive drums and bass sounds. And Music for the Masses is just like a huge sounding record, which again, just like it like assaults you with sound. But I think the mix on Black Celebration is way better. It still has those aggressive elements, but they're not mixed as loud, and they sit down way lower in the mix on this record. And it lets the songs like do more of the talking, and I think it works really well. Yeah, like you guys both said, Question of Lust, Question of Time is really good. I really like Sometimes. I think it's one of their better ballads. Stripped is awesome. Yeah, it's a great record. You guys said everything else there was to say about it, but interesting lists.
Very. Yeah, I think Joe saying that, will it ever happen again? A number 1 and a dead last lining up? Top of my head, I can't even imagine, unless there's like an artist with completely different eras where you just like hate one and love the other. That's the only way it could happen. But bizarre. It
is, especially one with as many albums as they have. Like if it's a 6 albums, then sure, I could see that happening. But for a 14 album discography to have that kind of flip, it's very interesting, especially since Jason seemed higher on the other era, similar era ones. I mean, Black Celebration was 3 years after, so it's not like it's a completely different lineup or anything like that. So very interesting.
Actually, I take it back. It could happen when we do an artist that one of us absolutely hates. Like if we do Nirvana or something, Nevermind might be, one of our number 1s, and it just might be too much Nirvana for Jason to take, or U2 something, or Rage Against the Machine for me. Like, you never know. That could be the formula to get that to happen again.
Let us know your list down below, and for the really big Depeche Mode fans watching, let us know what you think of our lists. How wrong are we? How much more listening of Depeche Mode do we need to do? And as always, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, check the description for links to social media, and join us tomorrow for each of our top 10 favorite Depeche Mode songs.